Hi guys, welcome to Delaware Studios. Let's create a quiz application and integrate with SQLite database. The data source can come in any form, either embedded or from the cloud services. For the sake of this tutorial, you will be embedding questions to the SQLite database. Let's get started. Right there in the Android Studio, I have the source of this quiz application, and I'll be explaining in details how to create one. In the Gradle scripts, the build Gradle, we are only using the app compact version 7.25.3.1. That's the app compact library where we get to use all major functionalities in Android. No external dependencies included for now. Let's straight to the rest, the layout. Let's get to understand how the layout structure is going to look like. In the activity quiz, which is the launcher UI, we're going to have it structured this way, wrapped around the relative layout. Can you see right there in the preview? You have the large text, which depicts the questions, and the radio buttons, which actually wrapped around the radio group. So I'll actually be explaining how each element is. That's the linear layout right inside the relative layout with an orientation of vertical that houses other elements of the UI. We have the text view with an ID of text view 1, which will depict the questions at each point in time, and a radio group with an ID as well, where you get to have the child tags as the radio buttons. In the radio group, you have the buttons, and we have three buttons, three radio buttons, and you set them appropriately with the text as well. If you notice, it has a text depicting that is going to be the options for the answers, and the radio toggle will actually be the selection on a particular option. And the last element right there is the button, which actually has a next text, and from that you should depict that this is actually going to take you to the next it's actually going to take you to the next question. So you have that set up. Let's get to look at the activity results. This is going to be the results page after you might have finished the questions, and you're going to have the accumulated score, and you're just going to depict this using the rating bar. Since we're going to have 5 questions, and we just set up 5 rating bars, and with the number of stars 5, and with that you could actually score the rating bar with the scores that the user had from the quiz. So it's the relative layout is the first tag, and right there in the linear layout you could actually set up the rating bar, and you could see the rating bar right there with the number of stars 5 and the step size 1.0 with the rating as well. And the large text is just going to be, let's say, a comment based on what the score and what that score really stand for, just like a sort of comment to the score. So you have that setup. So we have basically 2 layouts, the activity quiz and the results. So we should understand what we'll be expecting right there in the Java classes. Heading straight to the Java classes, as we all know, we'll be using the SQLite database to save questions and answer at runtime to the database. So you can actually improve more on this. Probably you want to use a cloud service. You can even use sync adapter to actually sync questions and answer on the fly to your application for use. So I have the sub package of data, which has the DB helper and the quiz contract. We all know what the contract is by now. That's where you decide to issue out the columns you'll be using, and as well you could issue out the content authority, and this is where you have to bind a contract to set up a contract of your SQLite database. So I'm actually going to start from there. So the quiz contract has a static class and inner static class called the movie entry, which implements the base columns. So in here we have the table name and the columns needed. We have the first column, which is the key ID, the questions, the answer, and the three options that you'll be having with the keys: first option, second, and third, ABC. So those are the columns that you'll be using right there in this application. Let's get to look at the DB helper, where we'll be able to create a table and also load questions and answer to the database. The database name, we give it quiz, and this is an object of the SQLiteDatabase, and also a constructor of the DB helper, which takes the context, the major context, and you get to actually call the superclass to pass in those parameters. In the onCreate method, we get to create the database, the table rather. Now, if you should look at the query that was issued, create table if not exists, based on the table name called table quest. The first column is the key ID, which is going to be an integer, a primary key, and also auto increment. And the second column is a question. There's a text data type. The answer, the text data type. The first options, also in text data type. We have the second, which is the option B, text data type, and option C, also text data type. So those are the values that this application will be listening for and saving them rather in the SQLite database. So you should have that at the back of the mind. You need the key ID, you need the question, the answer, and the three options. So you could execute the SQL, and this will actually going to create the table. And right there, the add questions method is also triggered, and we'll get to look at what this add questions method is doing. It's a private method which can only be called from the DB helper, and now you have to create an object of each questions, which you could actually see right there. And before I go through this, I would like us to get acclimatized with the question class. This question class actually has, let's say, is the setter and getter for each values, which will be saved into the DB, the SQLite database. It's a class with fields, as you can see. We have the ID, the questions, the three options, and the answer. So those are the major fields needed, and those are the only fields needed. The first constructor here is an empty constructor of the class, where we get to set the values of all these variables to empty once you call on the empty constructor. Now the major constructor that will be called, we actually pass in those variables and set them to their appropriate fields. The first parameter is the question, the option A, the B, the C, and the answer. So that's the format that you get to call this helper class, which is the question constructor, to be able to pass in data which will be saved to the SQLite database. You should understand the gimmick, the essence of this model. So this is actually going to help you set values and also get them. So now you have a set and get, which was generated, and it's going to return its appropriate values. So when you get, you are going to return the question. When you get the options, you get to return the options which you have set earlier. And now you can even still set the value of the questions, the answer, the options to different value by calling the set method. The set ID, you could pass in an integer of an ID. This is actually going to set an ID, a new ID. And even you can set a question. This is actually going to take a question string as a parameter, and at this point in time it could actually set that question. So you have that set up. The setter and getter are cool. So you'll be needing that rather than the DB helper, which will be passing in those values. So add questions is basically where you get to populate the questions and answer which will be needed throughout the quiz application. So if you should notice, we created an object of each question. So this is the first question which was uploaded, and the first question, if you notice, this is the question itself. If permissions are missing, the application will get these at runtime. So that's the first question. And we have for the options, is it a parser? Is it SQLite open helper? Is it going to be security exception? So now those are the three options. Now the last field is going to be the answer, which is security exception. So that's the answer. So that's how it's going to flow. So with that, we could call the helper, which is the questions class, to set those values, and you could actually save that to the SQLite database. So cool. We've been able to upload 5 questions, and those are the questions you can see right there, 5 of them. And you call on add questions. This is another helper method which will enable you to vividly add these questions to the database. Now on upgrade, you could drop older table if existed. So that's the essence of the on upgrade. Now these add questions which were called after each question's object was created, and it takes the question, its object as a parameter. So that's what it listens to, and you would now call the content values of the SQLite database. You instantiate, and with that you could put into the columns of the SQLite database and its corresponding values. And now look at the key of the question. You're going to actually put in the quest, which is going to be the object, and you get the question, which you actually get from the question class over here, the get question, which will return what the question string so it's going to return that, and with that you could actually get that, and you could set that to the content values, and at the end you need to insert into the table quest, which is the table name and its values. So you have that set up. So that's the add questions you continually see after the creation of each question object. Cool. Now after send and do, you need to get all questions from the SQLite database, which you'll be using the list, and you have that instantiated with an array list called the question list. So this is going to actually serve as the bunch of all questions right there in the database. Now you need to actually select all query. You have to issue out a query to select all of those questions. So that's why you need the statement select all from the table. Cool. And you pass that as a string called select query, and you need an object of the database. This time it's going to get the readable database. Now the cursor, it's actually a bunch of data which you use right there in the SQLite database, and this is actually going to save data from the database. So now you issue out the query using the raw query, and you're passing the select query, which is the string, which is the query itself, select all from table, and it's actually going to use the database get readable database object method rather. So with that you pass all values to the cursor. So the cursor now has all data from the database query. So you have that set up. Now you need to loop or iterate through the cursor so that you'll be able to extract values from it. So that's why you have to move to the first index of the cursor, which is basically going to be 0, and with that you do some things. So while moving to the first, there's a do while loop. You do something. So in the process, you set the ID, because now the cursor has value. You're now getting to set to the model, which is the questions model. Now the first cursor, we get an integer, cool, which is what the ID, the quiz ID, and this second parameter is going to set the question, and which is actually a string. That's why you're having an index of 1 of an array. That's the second, And the third one is an answer, and you have for the options A, B, and C. So with this now, you could add to the quiz list array. So you could add each of these elements to the array. So you have that set up. So you always do this while the cursor move to the next. So there's a do while loop to actually get this done. And you need to return the list array, which is the question list. Very important, which should be used when called. You can also get the row count. Probably you want to know the number of questions right there in the SQLite database. So you could issue out this query to actually get the count. After you might have run all of the select all from the table, you have that pass into the cursor as well as we've done right there for selecting for all questions and passing them into the question list array. Now you need to call the get count. So this is actually going to return an integer. It's going to get the number of rows or the number of questions right there in the SQLite database. So you could also use that as a helper method, which is handy. So with that, we'll now understand how data has been passed into the SQLite database, and from there you could call and you could populate the UI with those questions and answer. So once the user toggle, you know the particular answer that corresponds to that question. So from there you could be able to handle all those logic. So we'll be doing all those logic right there in the main activity, which is called the quiz activity. And we'll get to brings up the UI. This extends the app compact activity as usual, and we have a list of the questions. We have an integer for the score. We also have for the question ID. Those are the integer values we need to keep tag on. This is the question object, which is the model, and a text view called text questions, which will actually depict the questions. And the radio buttons, we have 3 of them, are the A, B, and C, and the button next, which we see right there in the UI of the activity quiz. Now you set the content view to the activity quiz. We instantiate the DB helper. We'll be using the DB helper since we'll be calling some of the methods from the DB helper. Now the first method we'll be calling from the DB helper is the get all questions, which is going to return a list. And this time we'll be passing that to the list we've actually created there that actually used the question class as its generic class called. So passing here. So we have a list ready with the get all questions method. Now, how are we going to get a current question? We need to detect the present question. So you actually get this since you have a list. You could get the ID of the list. A list is actually going to be an object of an array. So from that array, you could actually extract its ID. So you should get the first ID called 0, followed by the second 1, 2, 3, and so on. So that's why you could get, and based on the ID, the integer we have here. So the first one should be 0. That's why it's set to 0 at start. So you initialize the text question, and you also initialize the radio buttons. The same thing goes for the button next. Now, after that, you set the question view. Look at the question view right there. This is like a view that will continue to be called anytime you need to set something new. So this is the set question view method, which actually sets the text to the questions, and this time it's going to get the current question. Call on the get question, which is where from the model, and it's actually going to get the option for A, B, and C and set that to its appropriate view. We've actually initialized the view right there in the onCreate, and after that there will be an increment of the question ID once the set question view is being called. So now the first question view is called right there. So any next call we have an increment. So that's just what that is. And any next call will be triggered when you click the next button, which you have to set the onClick listener to the button. You need to override, you need to instantiate the view onClick listener and override an onClick method. You should understand that by now. Now, we are handling the onClick of the next button. we've been able to create a view. Now you need to understand how to move from one question to the other. You call the radio group with its ID, and the radio button will be the answer. We all know that. You call from the group, you get checked radio button ID, so that's going to be the answer. Once you check, that's the answer. That's where we're going to detect the answer from the toggled radio button. You need to clear check. Probably once you click next, you don't want the radio button to be active or to be checked on any of it until the user take action. And you could actually log that the answer to the lockout or to the Android monitor. That's for the purposes. Now there's the first if statement. If the current question, when you get the answer, because we've actually registered the answer to the model from the SQLite database, we know that. If it equals the present answer you're giving, you have that, you add that to the score, because the score starts from 0. So as the question has been answered, the scores are also accumulated. So you add that to the score. Once the right answer is detected, now we need to set an endpoint, and the endpoint is when the question ID is less than 5. That's where we know that we've gotten to the end of the question. So we've been able to set the ID to which is going to be an integer. At that point in time it should be 5, because you would have iterated. You would have moved from next down to the 5th. Once it gets to the 5th, you pass in the current question, and you also set the question view at that point in time. So once you set the question view, an iteration to 6 won't actually happen, because we only have 5 questions. So that means it's going to stop at that point in time. So that's what it's going to do. Else, so once the question ID is getting above 5, that's a result. So you're going to trigger an intent, which we call the result activity. And this time you have to put some integers. You're going to put int as an extras while passing to the calling activity, and you're going to put the score. It's an integer, the score that would have been accumulated at the course of the next click. So you pass that as an extra called the put extras, and you start the activity. You finish up so that the user won't be able to go back to those questions, because once you've submitted the last question, that's all. You shouldn't go back to start manipulating answers again. So you finish that, and you have that set up. So you have the onCreate options menu, which is actually going to be for the toolbar if you want to inflate some of the options there and you want to do some other things from the menu. So you have that set up. So cool. I hope we understand how the activity, the quiz activity actually works, how we've been able to handle the UI, the toggle, the radio button, the radio group, how we've been able to get the answers, match them to the appropriate answer using the model, since we've already set those values initially, and at the same time how we've been able to track the current questions and how we get to iterate, move from each question to the other, and at the point of moving to one question to the other, the set question view continue to change dynamically with different questions until it gets to the last question. So that's all, or just within the short code you could achieve all that. You don't need a bunch of fragments to start going here and there for just the simple integration. The last activity that I'll be looking at is the result activity, which we're going to praise the UI with the result of the user, what the user got accumulated at the end of the question. So you have to call the layout activity result. I think we understand it's going to be a rating bar, and you get the rating bar initialized. You set the number of stars again, and even the step size. We've already done that in the layout. And the text view, which will actually be the comment of the result. You'll be expecting an intent. You pass that into a bundle, which you call the get intent, get extras. So that's the B, and you could get the intent from the key called score. So you pass that into an integer, it's called score. So with that, you're going to display the score into the bar. So the rating bar will handle that score, since it's going to come in the form of we have only 5 questions and we have 5 rating bars. So one answer or one correct answer, or you scored 1, you're going to have a rating bar of 1. You scored 4, the rating bar is going to be populated with 4 rating bar. So that's just what that means. So now in this, we have to handle the switch statement for the text, which is actually going to be the comment on each of those scores. So we have 0 to 5, since we have handling 5 cases of the rating bar. So at 0, the text could be you scored 0, keep learning. So at 1, 20%, study better. 40, keep learning. 60, good attempt. 80, maybe you've been reading a lot of Android programming quiz. And 100, probably you scored all. You're an Android JetBrain. So that's just a comment that will come after the answers, the appropriate answers, or the appropriate score. Now, in the options item selected, we just undo a menu there, which could trigger you back to the main activity. Probably you want to have another quiz, or you want to start up another one. So instead of you just going back, what about the window, or let's say the application will just close and you have to relaunch? You could just click on the menu at the top, which will take you back to the quiz activity to start the quiz one more time. So that's just what the on options item selected is doing, handling the menu, which trigger an intent to the quiz activity to actually return back to the quiz activity class. With all said and done, I hope we've been able to understand fully how to integrate a quiz, how to set up a quiz application, a simple quiz application with 3 options. You could add more options as you wish, and you just have to modify the model to take on another option field, and you set that up easily, quite achievable. So with all this, you could be able to set up your own quiz system, and you can also take away the questions, upload that to the server, use Sqlite data to continue to seek to different elements, and you could also use content provider to call those data, and just the rest are just implementation, which you have right there in the channel. You could lay on some different implementation that we've used on data. The main logic is how to actually set up those values, which we've done right there in the quiz activity. Let's get to look at it, the quiz activity, where the logic is, where we've been able to map each questions and extract the answers to the question, and be able to move from one question to another. You could also set higher logic as well if you really desire. So it depends on what you wanted. So this is just like an entry point on how to create a quiz application in Android. A quick dive into the manifest. Wow, expecting nothing too tough. Just declare activity and you're good to go. How to use that activity and you're fine. So thank you guys for hanging out with me throughout this tutorial. I'll be uploading the source code to my GitHub account, and I'll be setting this up, showing the screencast of how this actually